Hi, my name's Ree, and I recently have overcome emetophobia by working through the Thrive programme. I'm just going to do a video to talk about what I did to help me work through the book on my own, what I tried, what things worked really well for me, like to help with actions. So I was successful at treating myself at home without without the need to see a Thrive consultant to help and support along the way. So obviously in the first couple of chapters of the book, I learnt all about how many limiting beliefs I had and how negative they all were, how mean they were to myself. They just weren't very nice at all. And obviously then Rob teaches you in chapter 2 all about positive visualization and the power of positive visualization. And this was probably one of the actions that I found hardest to remember to do daily. I found that if I forgot for a couple of days, if I was busy and I hadn't visualized positively to sort of anxious scenarios that I feared, I did notice a difference. I did find I'd worry that a little bit more. I'd feel a bit more anxious about those scenarios. For example, I worried about, obviously, if I caught a stomach bug, if my son caught a stomach bug and I caught it off him, etc., etc. And I soon got into a routine of visualising every single night before bed, just 10 minutes when I was nice and relaxed before bed, when I was trying to get to sleep. I would focus every single night, being right, okay, let's do my visualisation now. And I really noticed a difference. Every night, for example, I would visualise that I would be sick, I'd be nice and calm, I wouldn't make a big deal out of it, and I'd be really proud of myself, obviously in a bit more detail. And then as the weeks went on and I was obviously visualising that every single night, I soon started having dreams where I would vomit in my dream and then I'd say, oh, that wasn't a big deal. So it was really embedded in my brain that I did have the ability to deal with a situation more calmly. It was very, very powerful. And I also found I would wrap all my scenarios that I wanted to visualise, like obviously avoiding stomach bugs, well, not avoiding stomach bugs, obviously getting a stomach bug. My son started nursery. I was nervous about long car journeys in case my son was sick. I would write down those scenarios in bullet points onto a page. So I found it was almost like broken down slightly. And also myself, and also I know my friend Katie, who overcome emetophobia using this program, we occasionally would draw out our visualizations like a comic strip almost, so we could visualize those images, and that was very, very helpful, very helpful. And then obviously the locus of control came next. That was a really big turning point for me, because I could see how negative I was about everything, about every situation. I just didn't feel like I could cope with anything. I didn't have any coping skills. But also, obviously, from looking at the information Rob had given, I could see what type of person I wanted to be and what I wanted to strive towards and work towards. And my locus of control score was 23 out of 30, which is classed as really high. And I was adamant that a good 9 or 10 of those would never change. But I followed the actions in the locus of control chapter, worked really hard on them. I took up some new hobbies. I started, before I got made redundant, I specialised in fashion and sewing, and I started taking up sewing again, processing that all internally. I would take my son to baby groups and I process all that internally. I just started to gently challenge my locus of control, and I just started to process all these challenges very internally. And then as time went on with the book, I carried on working through those actions, putting a lot of effort into them, and my score went down to 0 by the end of the book. And a couple of questions, especially ones to do with self-esteem, the one where it says if you're to be criticised, it would make you anxious. I never thought in a million years I would change that. But then as I carried on working hard every single day, I soon realised that when someone was criticising me, I just stood there and I just thought, you know what, your opinion really doesn't matter to me anymore. If I was confident in myself and what I'd done, and I believed in what I'd done, someone criticising me just didn't matter anymore, because now I see it as it's only a criticism if I choose to take it as a criticism. Like, they're the ones with the problem, it's their issue, they're the ones who are bringing something up. It's how I choose to take it, and I never ever thought I would ever change that. I'm immensely proud of it, but the hard work will pay off if you keep at it. Then I never rushed any chapter. I would take my time on it. The big chapters I would sometimes do over 2 or 3 nights when my son was in bed. I didn't want to rush it. I wanted to fully understand it. I would make notes all over the pages, underline all the bits that I found really were really important, the bits that really stood out to me in my emetophobia. It was just covered in notes. I also made notes in my notebook. I wanted to know it inside out. And when I finished a chapter, I didn't just think, oh, right, let's jump straight to the next chapter now, let's get into the next one, I'm really excited. I'd spend 3 or 4 days working on the actions to really thoroughly understand them and make sure I was doing them properly and they were working, and I was managing my thoughts in the correct way for the appropriate actions. And I feel that was really vital, a really important part of how I overcame the emetophobia. Obviously next came self-esteem, and the chapter is just incredible. If you work hard on the positives and you process them every single day, you'll just soon notice an incredible difference in yourself. Rob is very, very clever with the book, and he really knows what he's talking about. I personally found just putting sort of some bullet points of my positives on my phone wasn't as useful for me, because I found when I was processing them, because I've got a little boy running around, I'd be processing them in my head from obviously like a short bullet point, and I'd get distracted or my mind would wander. Obviously my son would run around or walk into a door or something, and I'd get distracted. So I found that I decided to buy a notebook, and I called it my positives book, and a couple of times a day I would sit and write my positives down in this book, and I would probably write like a A5 page on each positive. So I processed it so thoroughly. This really, really helped me, and I'm sure this is a really important part of how my self-esteem went from 25% to 85% in just sort of 9 weeks. And every time I processed it, I would write down what my positive was. I'd write down how proud I was of it, what I'd done to achieve this positive, what action I'd taken on, and the difference from how I would have say experienced the situation, or how I never would have done that positive before. So next one. So social anxiety was a big one for me, that area of the book. I really challenged my thoughts on social anxiety. If I ever felt a insecure thought or a anxious thought about what someone would think of me, or sort of wouldn't make eye contact with someone because I was worried about my looks or anything to do with that sort of thing, I would, when obviously the moment had passed and I sort of got home, I would sit down and I'd write down exactly what had happened, why I felt that way, what was really the worst thing that they could think, what was the worst thing that could come from it, and I'd just look at it with a bit more perspective, like how really they probably wouldn't even care, I'm just causing these feelings in my head. I'd write it all down, and then I'd write sort of how I would want to deal with a situation next time. So, and I would challenge that next time. So next time I came across a situation, I would make eye contact with my husband's work colleague, for example, and not feel insecure about myself. I would challenge that, and then when I did challenge those feelings, I would make sure I'd remind myself what I had wrote down in the book. But this technique of writing down like that, I would also use that for any sort of anxious thoughts, any thoughts to do with emetophobia. If I suddenly worried about being sick, if I felt sick, If I were worried about my son getting ill, I would write down exactly what I was worried about, what the worst case scenario was, how I wanted to deal with it next time, and I would try and bring a bit of humour into it, just to sort of make me see a little bit more perspective on it. For example, when I was anxious about, say, hearing my husband be sick, I'd remind myself that it is just a sound. It's not like this sound is going to sort of break open the bathroom door and come and hover over me and attack me in my sleep. It is just a sound, and I found just putting a bit of humour into it just made me just see the bigger picture that bit more, and it just made it that bit easier to turn that thought internal and to challenge it and overcome it. So the Unhelpful Thinking styles in the book was a big eye-opener, and once I'd read it, I was really eager to start the actions and change how I was, and become this different person. I wasn't so negative and obsessive and paranoid, the list goes on. And I gently challenged my avoidance behaviours, and using my new skills that I'd learnt, I took my time with it. I didn't push myself until I was ready. A big one for me was opening doors in public. I just didn't want to be opening doors. I always used my sleeve, but I just challenged it very gently, and I just told myself that I could tolerate these experiences, I could tolerate the feelings, and it wasn't going to be the end of the world. I'd remind myself, if I was walking up to a door and I suddenly worried about it, I would be like, no, you can do this. And I reminded myself I was just thinking black and white thinking, nothing is going to happen. I was catastrophizing the situation, and even if something did come of it, I was learning to have the coping skills to deal with it. I could tolerate my discomfort that came from it, and over time I managed to challenge all of my avoidance behaviours, and I no longer use any of them, and I don't feel nervous because of it. I just did one at a time, and did it at my own pace. I didn't rush it. I didn't want to rush it, and that worked really, really well for me. And so I obviously, as well, another major part of the book was learning to manage your thinking and your language. I learned to not catastrophize things and not exaggerate things. I without even knowing, I would exaggerate just normal situations without even realizing. I would exaggerate it in the way I spoke about it. So once I started noticing that, and noticing I wasn't exaggerating, say, oh, I'm starving, or I'd use the word ridiculous a lot. Once I stopped, noticed and put a stop to exaggerating just normal situations, I noticed I wasn't exaggerating emetophobic situations in my head. I was obviously turning them into this big, out of proportion, I don't know if that's the right word, I was just turning it into this big, huge situation it didn't need to be, but I was doing that in my head. I was catastrophizing it, and I really focused on not using any of that language and not exaggerating just everyday scenarios, and that really had a massive knock-on effect to emetophobic situations and anxious situations. And obviously just generally I just learned to take a step back from things and just look at things with perspective. Like I said before, I just tried to put a bit of humour in things when I looked at them with perspective. You know, if I saw vomit on the floor, it's not going to grow legs and run after me down the street, sort of thing. And it's just nice to think of it like that in a way, because it's always been such a serious thing, and to overcome it and look at it in a new light like that is it's quite powerful, really. And I mean, all of this that I've talked about now, so coming to the end, everything I talked about I had to work at daily. I put so much effort into it, persistent effort every single day. And at times I thought, oh gosh, I'll just have a couple of days off. I mean, I've got a lot going on. But then I did notice a slight fallback. I had to keep the ball rolling. I had to keep going at it. And as time got on, all the actions just got easier. They started just to become habitual, rather than me having to sort of stop and be like, no, you need to do this, you shouldn't think of it like that way. I was just thinking the right way anyway. And another thing that I did was I put positive statements everywhere around the house. Obviously Rob suggests to do it towards the end of the book anyway, but I didn't just put statements out that were to do with the book. For example, my anxiety is coming from inside of me, I'm creating this anxiety, I can stop it. Is this thought in my mind helpful? If not, you should change it or bin it. I had those around the house, but I also just had general uplifting, powerful statements as well. I went on Pinterest and just printed loads off. Just ones that just reminded me how far I'd come, and I found those really powerful as well. They're everywhere around the house. They're on kitchen cupboards, they're on the fridge. I've got one just here. When I walk up the stairs, when I'm doing the dishes, there's a big one stuck on the window in front of where I do the dishes. Everywhere I go around the house, there's these statements. And obviously my husband sees them as well, so if he ever noticed me sort of saying something negative or worrying about something, he'd remind me of the statement next to him on the wall. And that is a real big part. It just uplifts you and it just reminds you how well you're doing. And then obviously just to sort of finish it off, I mean, I took 9 weeks to do the book. Obviously I know it can be done in sort of 6 to 7 weeks, but for me, I needed that little bit more time just to make sure that I understood it. And with my little boy as well, I had to juggle obviously looking after him and being mum and sort of spending time with my husband. And I didn't want to sort of just have the book. I didn't want to just be sat reading a book on the sofa whilst my son has to sit and occupy himself. Obviously I had limited time when I could do it, but for me it worked really well taking that little bit longer to make sure I thoroughly understood it. And once I'd finished it, I also read through it a second time, which I found very, very helpful, because I noticed actually there were a few things that I had been missing. Once I completed a book, I thought, oh, but I still feel a little bit unsure of this, I'm still a little bit anxious here. And like for example, when I reread through the book, I realised that I was still struggling a little bit with my desire for control. So I put that bit more effort into it for a few weeks, just to sort of work on those bits that I'd fallen slightly behind on. And to be honest, I think I'll probably read the book again, even though I'd now class myself as cured of the emetophobia. Obviously I'm still working hard on the actions. I don't want to slip back into old habits. I want to make sure I maintain them, and not only because obviously I don't want to slip back, but also just because it's just a better way of living. It's a more positive way of living, and it's just a nicer example to set to people and to my children. It's just a much nicer example, and I know it will have an impact on the person he will grow up to be, because I will influence him in so many better ways. So I hope that was helpful. Obviously this is just sort of what worked for me, but I know at times in the book when I might have struggled in sections, it would have been really helpful to see a video from someone else who had worked through it and was successful, and because it just might be 1 or 2 things that you think, oh yeah, I'll give that a go, that might work for me. So yeah, and thank you and goodbye.